Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to another CAS Talk with me, Ikenna Azwike, and my co-host, Hajar Yakubi. Right, in this session, we'll be taking a look back at the first 3 anchoring events, which were focused on disaster risk management, nature-based solutions, and a session devoted entirely to climate adaptation. What's the latest happening in terms of climate adaptation on the African continent? And first up...
The former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and I jointly established the Global Center for Adaptation in Africa, GCA Africa, hosted at the bank and supported also by the government of Netherlands. Together, the African Development Bank and GCA Africa has launched the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program to mobilize $25 billion in climate finance for Africa and to scale up transformative actions on climate adaptation. Africa has been shortchanged by climate change, and it should not be shortchanged by climate finance. So let's turn words into action, hope into reality, promises into financing for Africa. Together, we adapt. Together, we prosper.
I argue policymakers, decision makers, and world leaders to remember their promises to the next generation, to the planet, and to do climate action with adaptation and focus.
A climate-smart development could drive major increase in African agricultural output. Promotion of climate-resilient development pathway requires a multilateral approach and strong partnership to address the impact of climate change, increase climate resilience, and the adaptive capacity of our communities.
We can't afford to delay climate action and plan ahead on realistic, sustainable, and resilient recovery from the COVID-19. As one of the most vulnerable countries, Rwanda prioritized climate change adaptation and policies and strategies and ensure their implementation.
It happens that 70 to 80% of Africans depend on the primary sector for their economy, be it agriculture or livestock or fisheries or forestry and so forth. And this land is severely impacted upon by drought, desertification, climate change, and the combined effect of human activities.
Any action on climate adaptation should consider the people at the front line of climate crisis, and these are the principles of justice which we espouse.
Even in the best of circumstances, if we were able to stop climate change at 1.5 degrees, there will be a world which is much worse than the one we face today. And, as often happens in human affairs, it's only when people realize that things don't happen just for other people, that adaptation to climate change is a necessity for everybody, that the focus changes.
And now we are working to have a 2050 strategy in line with the call from Paris. This is an opportunity because you will attain sustainable development if you are able to plan longer. That is the advantage. And of course, the disadvantage of climate change is very clear. We are in a vicious circle of poverty because if you look at the case of what's happened recently in Mozambique, like after you do a lot, then your development will be reverted back to zero with the impact of climate change variability. That will keep you in a vicious circle of poverty. That's why we have been calling for, we need to have more ambitious action to have a better absorbing capacity of any kind of shock.
Initiatives like PropCom in Nigeria are helping out more than 500,000 farmers become climate resilient, including embracing sustainable forestry and timber products. Scaling up solutions like these to support African communities is now urgent. Today, the UK Prime Minister launched the new Adaptation Action Coalition to drive forward adaptation across Africa and the world. The coalition includes some of our key partners, such as Egypt and Malawi in Africa, and will invite other countries to join. The Race to Resilience, launched today by the UN Climate Champions team, clearly can be the catalyst that's needed for a step change. In the build-up to COP26 and beyond, we want to work with all of you to make his vision of climate resilience for 4 billion people from vulnerable communities a reality.
Now, that was a bit of an abrupt cut there to that video, but it made the video no less interesting. That was a wrap-up of the session that was held earlier, Adaptation Action in Africa. And it was hosted by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it included a very high-level session, which was hosted by the Minister of Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation, Sigrid Kaag herself. What generally, we've seen some clips there, but what were the kind of, the focus points of the session?
Yeah,
Hajar?
That's maybe a good thing to mention. So we saw that the first focus point was really about raising ambition. And then it was also about, it was really a session devoted also to unlocking action. And as a matter of fact, we actually have one of our few guests here in the studio with us today, the Director General of International Cooperation at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kitty van der Heijden. So nice to have you here with us. And she was one of the initiators also, hosts of the event that we saw.
Fantastic. Look forward to hearing more from you in a second, Kitty. We're also hoping that someone from via the video will be able to join us. Kevin Lunzalu, who is a youth reporter. Yes, I see him nodding over there. Fantastic. A youth reporter. He's based in Kenya, where he's also the co-founder of the Kenyan Youth Biodiversity Network. So we'll be hearing from you as well shortly, Kevin. I'd like to kick things off, though, by asking you, Kitty, what is the reason that there's an anchoring event focused on purely on the African continent? There are no other anchoring events focused on other continents. So why Africa?
It's not because in other regions we don't see the disasters that climate change leads to for poor people. But if any continent is hard hit, it's Africa. If you look at the IPCC report, it says that there are 10 climate hotspots in this world. 10 climate hotspots. 5 of those are in Africa, right? There's no continent that is so hard hit by climate change but Africa. So we must. Why do we want this so badly? Because we have agreed as a world community, including my government, in 2015 that we promise a life of dignity for everybody on this planet. Africa, I've lived many years of my life in Africa. Africa still has entrenched poverty. What we see in Africa is that climate change undoes the progress that we have painstakingly made as development partners, government, NGOs, science communities, partners. It's undoing what we have done over the past years. If we want to achieve the SDGs, we must act on climate change, both mitigation and adaptation.
Yeah.
So that's what's at risk, really. It's undoing all the work if we don't.
It's massive, and you can see it before your eyes. And then, I'm an economist by background, and I think it's incredibly important to understand that climate adaptation simply makes good economic sense, right? It has a very high rate of return. The Global Commission on Adaptation made it very clear, if we invest 1.8 billion, that's a lot of money for sure, in adaptation, we would have a potential economic benefit of $7.1 billion.
Wow.
Now that's the type of money we want for Africa and for the world. Investing in early warning has a 1 to 5, 1 to 10 leverage factor, so it just makes good sense. And then last but certainly not least, because I feel Europe and Africa are so close together. The Netherlands have been a partner of African governments and particularly of the African people for the past 75 years since we started development cooperation. If we are serious, we can do nothing else but invest in Africa and make sure that we deliver a life in dignity for all, and that includes adaptation.
Clear.
Why Africa?
Clear.
Yeah.
Kevin, what are your thoughts, having heard Kitty just explain her position? Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, thank you so much, and I can hear you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the government of the Netherlands for hosting this very important summit. And picking on from where Honorable Kitty has left, climate change seems to be undoing the development that has been done in Africa and in most parts of the world, because the core of this development was not anchored on scientific and traditional knowledge-backed risks that had been stipulated at that time. And I feel that this is the right time for Africa to re-engineer the way we develop. We have a golden chance to chart our own development path, which includes having resilient systems, having climate smart farming models, banking on our young people, banking on renewable energy sources. So when we put all these things together, that create a very strong foundation, we will not have much to care about in the future of risks that come to undo what we have already done. And I think I like what speakers said in the Accelerating African Adaptation event, that it is fundamental that we bank on our people, that our people are the most important resource that we have. And as a young African, I think, and coming from a continent that is averagely African, youth, I think that our people in this sense mean young people. Yeah. So let's see how we can put in the interest of young people.
Let me pick up on something you said there, talking about the importance of all of these changes for people. Paint a picture for us. What does the next...
Sorry guys, are you mute?
Oh, can you hear us? Can you hear us again?
You anymore.
Oh, looks like we're having connection problems. Oh, now you can. Okay, let's try. Paint a picture for us. What does that future, let's say 2030, we've managed to implement, the finance has been there, we've managed to implement these climate adaptive solutions, there is the investment that Africa needs. What is the impact on, how does that shape the future for young Africans on the continent?
Yeah, we're looking at young people who are still building their future. So we're talking about youth who still want to go to school, get jobs, and eventually live a life that they would like to live. So to me, everything put into consideration, I would like to see education systems that have adaptation interests in them. I would like to see green jobs so that when young Africans finally get out of school, they are employed in green, sustainable jobs. These are well-paying jobs, deeply rewarding jobs, which will enable them to eventually live a sustainable, or rather the life that they want, but in a more sustainable way. So it starts right now that we are having fundamentally important, sustainable type of education for these young people, translating into green jobs and eventually translating into a better life for young people. That is the future that I...
Yeah. Great. And maybe to add to that, Kitty, if I could ask you, also Kevin, you spoke so much indeed about, the African continent is one where more than half of the population is under the age of 30, a lot of young people. And the key takeaways from Kevin and the one from the anchoring event, how is that going to be put into the development agenda of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Look, I think there's a couple of points. One is COVID-19 no doubt is a curse, but it brings an opportunity as well to reshape the future, one that we've never had before. We've never, as a world community, put 17% of the global GDP, of our global economy, in relief and recovery packages. Never. Yeah. If we use that money well, both to reduce emissions and to make sure that we build a resilient world, we can actually achieve the SDGs. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for young people, for the next generation, but for the global community as a whole. I think second, it's the incredible importance, Kevin mentioned, that green jobs with a focus on water, a focus on agriculture, and on resilient growth. And if you look at a place like Malawi, poor people are extremely dependent on their natural resources. Poor people spend 63% of their income, their small income, on buying food. Even small increases in food prices in Malawi due to climate change because there's a drought or there's flooding, that's the difference between life and death. That's the difference between being able to feed your children or starvation. And so this really matters, looking at water, looking at agriculture, looking at resilient economic growth to provide not just jobs, but to enable them to live a decent life. I think third, really looking at all of us to be adaptation partners. This isn't just an African job of an African government. This requires all of us. Here in the West, it requires NGOs, the science community, and the private sector. And it requires us to really tap into local knowledge. African people that are affected by climate change know damn well what they need. But we tend to think that we know best. Well, the West doesn't know best. We need to tap into local knowledge on resilience and make sure that we embed that in those programs. And then last but not least, I think the incredible importance of unlocking finance for adaptation for Africa. I know this is difficult and we need to enable Africa to develop bankable projects. If we do not do that and if we do not give them a strong financial footing, we will simply not achieve the SDGs, nor do we achieve the dream of a dignified life for all. So from my perspective, from our agenda as development practitioners, I want a AAA treatment for Africa. We need ambition, we need action, and we need to accelerate. And I have one favorite artist, Michelangelo, who painted in the Sixtine Chapel that wonderful picture of how we connect as human beings, and I connect to Africa in that way. But he also was a very wise man. And when we look at the ambition we need, let us be guided by what Michelangelo said, because he said, the greatest danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but rather in setting the ambition too low and achieving the mark. Africa deserves better. Africa deserves AAA treatment, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you so much. And
I think there's a particular African institution that is trying to lead the way, especially when it comes to finance, and is setting the bar high, and that is the African Development Bank. Let's take a look at a short quote from its president, Mr. Akimuma Adesina.
Your Excellencies, as we gather here today for the Climate Adaptation Summit, I would like to commend the visionary leadership of Prime Minister Rutte and the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Climate change is changing hopes and livelihoods dramatically. Africa's growth is being compromised by climate change. The sight of locust swarms devastating thousands of hectares of cropland in East Africa was shocking. Perennial droughts and encroaching deserts lay bare the vulnerability of the Sahel of Africa, scorching lives into misery and driving migration. Yes, we see all these things. Now we must feel. Now we must act. Now we must deliver on accelerated climate adaptation for Africa. The African Development Bank is at the forefront of climate finance for Africa. The bank has quadrupled its finance for climate to reach $25 billion by 2025. We have increased the percentage of our climate financing devoted to climate adaptation from 26% in 2016 to 55% by 2019. We launched the Desert to Power Initiative, a $20 billion initiative to build the world's largest solar zone in the Sahel. And at the One Planet Summit with President Macron, I announced that the bank will mobilize $6.5 billion in support of the Great Green Wall of the Sahel. The former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and I, together with Faye Kay and Patrick, have jointly established the Global Center for Adaptation in Africa, GCA Africa, based at the African Development Bank. The African Development Bank and GCA Africa have launched the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program to mobilize $25 billion to scale up transformative actions on climate adaptation. The program needs your very strong support. It's time for developed countries to meet the $100 billion per year in climate finance promised to developing countries. My late mentor, Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General as well, once told me, the only promises that matter are the promises kept. Let's turn words into action, hope into reality, promises into financing for Africa. Together we adapt, together we prosper. Thank you very much.
Very hopeful words. Together we adapt, together we prosper. Kitty, I saw you nodding furiously when Mr. Adesina mentioned the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program. Why are you so positive about that?
First of all, because it's homegrown, it's African solutions, and we need to unlock and enable African solutions for African people. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of our philosophy as development practitioners. So when my friend Adesina speaks, I tend to be silent, I listen, I learn, and I love what he says.
We Nigerians like to talk a lot, huh? So does he talk too much? Does he talk too much? Don't be shy.
But he talks wisdom. And for me, it is really about making sure that from this summit, from what he said, it is not just about hope, but this is a stepping stone to a global negotiation process that will end in Glasgow in November, COP26. This is all beautiful and fine and incredibly ambitious, but here we're raising ambition. That ambition needs to be embedded in the Conference of Parties in November. That is how you deliver on a promise. That is how you deliver on what grassroots people need. That is how you impact real people, real lives. And that's where I bond with my friend Adesina. This is about people's lives and livelihoods. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Africa knows what it needs. Mm-hmm. And I will make sure from what I can do, together, I was just with the Minister of Africa of the UK, to embed those actions, those ambitions, and those accelerations that we need, the AAA treatment for Africa in the COP26, because we cannot fail people's dreams.
Kevin, we don't have so much time, unfortunately, but I'd love to hear from you. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I like the fact that Mr. Adesina talked about putting aside around $3 million USD for the Youth Adaptation Program. And I'm only hoping that this fund is there to match an implementation program that is bottom up as opposed to top down. I mean, it has reminded me of sometime last year when we did a research with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs where we were asking young people on what they envision after post-2020 in terms of jobs, building back better, and education. And they were telling us we want to see this and this and this. So if you come up with a fund like that to match the needs that have already been identified from the local level, it works even better than having a fund and then now saying, okay, we have money and this is how we want to spend on you, so that the decisions on how to implement this fund are coming from top and not from bottom.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to both of you for your valuable and urgent insights. Really appreciate them.
Thanks, Adjar.
Thank you so much.
Okay, shortly we'll be welcoming 3 new guests who will all be joining us via video, and they'll be reflecting on the disaster risk management anchoring event that took place earlier. And it was broadcast live from Geneva. But before we introduce those guests, let's have a look at a video which shows some of the initiatives that are already being worked on.
Early warnings save lives. They must be accessible, understood, and actionable for every one of us so that we can face the impacts of climate change together.
Early warnings are more than weather forecasts.
To empower individuals and communities to act in sufficient time.
Early action is anticipating risk.
Key to saving lives and livelihoods, especially for those on the front lines of the climate crisis.
Son instrumentos que nos permiten monitorear eventos de manera eficaz y oportuna para la toma de decisiones.
Early warning systems should be people-centered
and save lives for everyone
everywhere.
Early action.
Early action is anticipated.
Early warning should
Early warning and early action to better
We must prioritize support to people most exposed and most vulnerable.
Early action.
Early action.
Early action is anticipated.
Early warning should be
early warning systems.
Early action.
To reflect on the disaster risk management goals, ambitions, barriers, challenges, we've got three guests joining us via video. The first is Mrs. Mami Mizutori. Yes, online. Good to see you. Who's the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Management. Then we have Mrs. Elina Väänänen, Specialist on Risk-Informed Early Action at the International Federation of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Mrs. Patricia Nyeng'uro, who is a climate scientist and one of Kenya's principal weather experts. Should we go with that? Let's go with weather experts. And she's an IPCC focal point, as it were, in Kenya. So thank you very much for joining us, all of you. I could direct this question to all of you, in fact, but I'm curious because you're all experts in disaster risk management. Mrs. Mizutori, share something new that you learned from the anchoring event on disaster risk management.
Well, actually, I don't know whether it's new, but what was really reinforced was that early warning systems, they save lives and livelihoods, but they can only do that when they are combined with early action. And that was very clear. The second thing was that it has to be people-centered, which means that it's not only to protect people, disaster risk management measures, they have to involve the people to become part of the solution, because those are the people who know what to do best. And the third thing I would say is that multi-hazard early warning system is so important. It can't focus on one single hazard, including biological hazard. We have to look at COVID-19, the biggest disaster that we've seen in many decades. We have to make sure that we understand what kind of risk is surrounding us. It's a complex risk, it's a systemic risk with cascading impact, and importantly, these risks, when they turn into disasters, the people who are most hit are the vulnerable people. Kitty talked about the AAA treatment to Africa. Absolutely, because Africa is at risk, and the people at risk in Africa are at most risk in the world.
Okay. It all sounds extremely sensible. Can you help me picture it, though? Can you give me an example of an early warning system, let's say, that ticks all of the boxes that you just described? Multi-hazard, involves the people in its creation, and so on.
So it has to be a early warning system that is based on the risk profile of that country. Let's say country A, what kind of risk is surrounding that country? And then it has to look at where are the most vulnerable people, so that the warning can reach the last mile. And then when I say it has to be combined with action, the communities have to come together to educate the people so that they respond to early warning system. And here again, they have to make sure that the most vulnerable people are helped within the community to respond. And it has to be beyond borders, because these disasters don't respect borders, right? A hurricane, a cyclone. So the early warning system needs to connect countries across borders. It has to be sub-regional, it has to be regional. That, for me, is a good early warning system.
Is there an example, though, of this being in place somewhere in the world right now? Or are these just ambitions of the perfect system?
No, it's not an ambition. Right now, we are building this in Africa with WMO, with IFRC. It's a roadmap of a continent-wide early warning system. We're also working with the African Union Commission. And what we're doing is that we're working with countries so that they work together. But answering your question, so we know that of the UN member states, only about 60 have early warning systems in place. This is not enough. So it's getting better, but there's much more to do. So I'm very glad that we're focusing on this issue today.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned the International Red Cross there. A good moment to bring in Elina. Elina, zooming in on the specific challenges that your NGO faces, can you elaborate on how risk-informed early action partnership, the early action partnership that you set up, how is that working in practice to speed up adaptation for disaster risk management?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, or REAP, as it's also known, was launched at the Climate Action Summit back in 2019 with the objective of making 1 billion people safer from climate disasters by 2025. We're doing this by bringing together the capacities and investments of the climate development and humanitarian communities that amongst them have a wealth of expertise in addressing the impacts of the increasing frequency and intensity of climate-related hazards. So our partnership is based on the idea that while we've made great advances in our ability to predict extreme weather events, whether they're floods and storms, that capacity isn't always leading to early action by vulnerable communities or countries. We have the evidence that acting early before hazards strike saves lives, livelihoods, as Assistant Secretary General Mizutori referenced, and as our speakers in the anchoring event referenced, we know we have the evidence. So you might ask, why isn't this happening at scale? There's 4 barriers that I'd like to highlight really quickly that also constitute the focus areas of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership. Firstly, we see that the enabling policies and laws aren't there. Multi-hazard disaster risk management plans, for instance, an area that UNDRR, also a REAP partner, is championing. And often the funding and delivery mechanisms aren't there or aren't linked to plans to actually identify what do you do when a hazard strikes. Third, this coverage of early warning systems is still insufficient, as was highlighted by the UN Secretary General today, the WMO Secretary General. We know we're not there yet, but we're also not quite there yet in matching the investments in the hardware of early warnings with the investments needed in ensuring that early warnings are understood and made actionable. And so in the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, we believe that by rallying our partners behind our 4 ambitious targets, addressing these four key barriers, we're confident that together we can do much more and achieve a systemic shift to acting before hazards strike.
And Elina, your organization is also involved in a project which features Patricia, right? Our next speaker.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure to introduce a video showcasing work from one of our partners, Resurgence. The video profiles the impactful Daraja project and features my co-panelist, Patricia's important role in a city-based initiative that's also contributing to REAP's goal of making 1 billion people safe from disasters.
Okay, let's run that video.
So we've been working with the Daraja project for some time now on co-design or co-developing of products specifically for Nairobi County. And this was to be able to show us what kind of information is needed by our users within the county. A lot of the information that we were giving out was not really reaching the end user like we had intended.
Yeah, great. And I think, Hajar, you had a question immediately off the back of that video for Patricia, right?
Yeah, right away. I mean, seeing this project, we were really wondering, like, what kind of concrete measures and ideas has it sparked right away?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and it's one that has been also interesting for me to deal with, because when we were producing weather information, we found out that there is quite a disconnect between the producers and the users of weather information. So to be able to bridge that gap with the help of projects such as the Daraja one has been a really useful way to be able to help people in informal settlements, especially to be able to adapt to the changing climate that we see. So we've been able to have weather champions within the informal settlements in the country, and this, especially in Nairobi County, and these help to spearhead weather information to enable people to act in advance. The uptake of this has been very encouraging, because percentages of those who are able to access weather information have really increased. And this is information that enables them to carry out their daily lives in a more comfortable way. Like, what do I wear as influenced by the weather? And if we're expecting floods or drought, what actions can they take? Do we need to clear the drains? Do I need to fix my roof? So it's really been interesting to work with these communities and to see them have a place in this system that leads to climate adaptation.
And how have you picked your weather champions? What credentials do you need to have to become a weather champion?
Well, in these formal settlements, it would be people who kind of already have a reach and also have an interest in weather information. And so they are community leaders. And these are people who can be able to rally people to action and be able to spread this information in as many ways as possible to reach as many people as possible. And this was done mainly with the help of the Daraja project. So they worked directly in the informal settlements, found these community leaders, brought them to us. We met together, sat together, did preliminary projects, worked on them. If they were too scientific, we tried to downscale them to a level where they're able to understand, reduce too much wording so that it can fit in an SMS that is sent easily out. And so in that way, we've been able to reach a lot more people than we would have if we were simply working by ourselves.
Great. Thank you very much, Patricia, and thank you to all of our guests. I wish we had more time to talk to you, but you've left us wanting more, so that's also good. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on now to talk about the nature-based solutions anchoring event. And to do that, we have, who's joined us in the studio, Brechtje van Wessenbeek. Have I pronounced that correctly?
Yeah, right.
Okay, it's okay. Brechtje is the lead researcher at the not-for-profit institute Deltares in Delft. And you're also an associate professor at Delft University, I understand.
Yes.
Now, you've been involved in many nature-based solutions projects. Give us your greatest hits. What's your favorite nature-based solution project?
I think the ones I like best is that couple river restoration with coastal restoration, because that's what nature-based solutions need, like a landscape approach or a catchment approach. So there's examples from Bangladesh, for example, where they do tidal river management, complete depoldering and bringing the river back into its original floodplain areas. But also examples from the US, for example, where they restore the Mississippi River by diverting it back into its wetlands and also by restoring the coastal areas and the coastal marshlands and sandy barriers. So these projects actually take along the whole range of different ecosystems.
Yeah. And nature-based solutions as a term itself seems, I don't know, I feel like I'm seeing it pop up in my Twitter timeline a lot more, whether it's to do with design, architecture, or indeed in climate. Is that right? Is there more uptake for this type of solution?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it has grown immensely in the last decade. And it's probably due to that we see with climate change, we see more pressures, we see more extreme events. And I think that our traditional engineering structures, under more pressure, we also see them failing more. So there's probably a need for more diverse and a larger portfolio of interventions.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And maybe adding to that, because you spoke about indeed like diverting water back to wetlands, they sound like very extensive operations in terms of resources and capacity. They sound like expensive operations. I don't know if that's correct, but is it feasible for countries with less wealth to also enhance their nature-based solutions, or do you see a disparity in that?
I think it is. I think there's a lot of countries that are maybe less developed, but still have more natural resources. And I think the challenges are there for them to start developing infrastructure and designing and constructing infrastructure in a nature-inclusive way. And that is where actually the real benefit of nature-based solutions will be in the future, I think, if we actually, sort of achieve a paradigm shift in infrastructure development and get the infrastructure sector, the engineering sector, to start working with nature as a base layer in their design and respecting these fluxes of sediment and water and species.
Yeah, and like
let's put it in a bit of context first, because let's convey the urgency of the need for nature-based solutions, and we can do that through a video that we have. We recently received it from the mayor of Beira in Mozambique. Let's run that video first, and then you can ask your question, Hajar.
Thanks for this opportunity sharing the challenges of Beira. Beira is a city in Mozambique. It's located in the center of Mozambique, and it has connection with neighbors countries, so it's a Beira corridor. Beira is an extremely exposed city. It's a vulnerable city to cyclone, to storms, and intensive rain. So we are used for flooding, and we are cyclones hitting us in the last 2 years very hard, and our understanding that no city can support those kinds of differences. You can see Beira since the last 2 years we had 3 cyclones. We had Idai, we had Shalana, and now Elewis. So all of them had a different way of action. But at this phase, we had a lot of flooding, and flooding is challenging us these days because the rain precipitation was about 300 millimeters. However, the city of Beira has run its master plan and is a guideline for developing the urban plan in the city. We are taking care of the drainage system so that with support with the Dutch, the World Bank, we are going to come up with the second phase of rehabilitation of the drainage system. We are also going to work with the World Bank, EFW, and the Dutch government for coastal protection. We are also working in the cadastres, so to make sure that we do our best plan in digitalizing the cadastre and everything. So all these kinds of projects which are taking place are integrated inside the master plan. We're developing the land development company to make sure that we can do the upgrading the level, breaking the public infrastructures. I'm talking about roads, drainage systems, sewage system, power and water, so the population can build in a safety way and to be more resilient. Our understanding is once we have resilient houses, we also need to have resilient neighborhoods. And another thing which is very important is the central government must play a strong role supporting the city, because the city is where things happen every day. Thank you.
Now, it doesn't get more frontline than that, and there are obviously many communities like this one in Mozambique. Brechtje, how can nature-based solutions help someone like this mayor and his people? It sounds like they just need investment in infrastructure. They just need money, but...
Yeah, it's correct that Beira is on the front line, but still during cyclones you get compound hazards. So you get a hazard from the back for rain with heavy rainfall and fluvial flooding, and from the front with waves from the sea, for example. Mm-hmm. So what they are doing there is not only investment in traditional or hard infrastructure, but they're also using nature-based solutions already. So they, for example, try to extend original rivers by making more space in the back for the rivers, retaining more waters, building back some floodplain and natural parks in the city, and building back mangroves and conserving reefs at the front, at the coastal part of the city.
So what you're saying is nature-based solutions has to be part of a kind of broader palette of solutions.
Yeah, and it can be used in combination with, let's say, early warning systems, and also with seawalls and levees, for example.
Yeah. Okay, now thank you very much again. I always feel like I wish we had more time to discuss these things, but thank you very much for your contributions. We've reflected what happened in the anchoring event on nature-based solutions, and now we're going to look ahead. Let me just check. Do we have time to... Yes, we do have time, I'm hearing, to speak to our next guest. And the topic of that is science and youth. And we'll do that with Mrs. Shamila Nair Bedouel, who's the Assistant Director General for Science at UNESCO. Thank you for joining us, Mrs. Bedouel. Can you hear me okay?
Shamila.
Oh, Jamila,
yes,
good.
The name Shamila. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to be informal. I appreciate that.
Please.
Now, so far, pretty much, we've only heard from policymakers. Tell us about the importance of the role of science when it comes to climate adaptation, Shamila.
Thank you, first of all, and thank you to the Netherlands government for inviting UNESCO to this really very important event. I would say that humanity is really at the crossroads today. What is the role of science today? Without science, technology, and innovation, we would not be able to even combat the coronavirus. So we have seen here in an unprecedented fashion scientists coming together, international solidarity to promote exchange of knowledge and information. And we really need to count on the hardcore science, climate-related science, international cooperation, and scientific monitoring of the environment. But this also brings us to a point of science diplomacy in the world and the sharing of scientific data. And this is the soft power of science that can unite nations. And this is what the coronavirus has demonstrated, that it is possible to collaborate beyond paywalls, patents, and publications. So at UNESCO, the S in UNESCO was born in 1945. UNESCO is really the vanguard promoting scientific cooperation across the nations to ensure that no one is left behind. And with respect to climate change, I'm very pleased to have heard all the previous speakers. And we have three focus of addressing science for climate and sustainability science for climate change, adaptation and mitigation. The three areas of intervention of UNESCO is understanding the impact of climate on water. Without water, we cannot wash our hands. So we see how important water is for societies and development today. So UNESCO promotes and supports countries to understand water management and promote the science of water management and understanding the hydrologic cycle. This intergovernmental hydrological program is really very important, understanding the needs of countries today. We also have another program which I wanted to touch briefly on, because I think
it has to be quite brief, I'm afraid, Shamila.
very quickly. Nature-based solutions and homegrown solutions. UNESCO is custodian to over 2,000 designated sites across the world. We have what is called the biosphere reserves. We heard a speaker earlier on talking about biosphere network in Kenya, where these are all part of UNESCO's over 700 biosphere reserves, where we can demonstrate it's possible to live in harmony with nature. And these biosphere reserves are laboratories of understanding impacts of climate change. And one of the major ones we have in Central Africa is the BioCloud project, bringing together 40 million people who share the Lake Chad, and we're able to demonstrate nature-based solutions and possible to monitor the Lake Chad to enable women to be empowered and protecting nature. So I think these are important, let's say, examples of how we can promote the living in coalition with nature. So we are promoting a new way of climate adaptation and mitigation. We know that the biggest loss today is biodiversity, and our planet Earth is suffering. So let's promote the new way of living in harmony with nature, a coalition with nature, a coalition of understanding our shared responses, shared values around nature, and a new alliance with nature, whether it is natural resources, Mother Earth, and even the skies. I think this is a new way of understanding nature. And for us, this coalition with nature will bring the science, technology and innovation, but indigenous knowledge peoples and the knowledge, these knowledge streams are extremely important to understand a new coalition with nature, a new alliance with nature, changing mindsets and behaviors to respect nature. So we believe that we are calling upon all of you and in this meeting to join the movement of the Coalition for Nature. We are told that maybe post-2020 biodiverse framework should protect 30% of
you've convinced us. It is an impassioned statement that you've made.
Join
I'm
the
signing
Coalition
up.
for Nature.
I'm almost afraid not to. This is just a fantastic statement. Thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you. And by the way, just in Africa, we have 85 biosphere reserves, and it's home to over 20 million people in 31 countries. Please join the movement, UNESCO's Biosphere Reserve.
We're joining. Hajar, are you joining?
No.
Brechtje,
Yeah,
you joining?
Yeah.
It's done.
Please.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Shamila, for joining us. Wow. Well, the topic of that, the official theme on my script was science and youth. That was a fantastic, picture, a sort of paradise picture that was painted by Shamila there.
Yeah.
Are you? What are your science skills like?
Extremely, amazingly average. You can.
Well, at least it's average.
Yeah.
Mine is just bad, just plain bad. Okay, listen, we have to wrap it up there, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that CAS Talk. We'll be back with more for the very last one, in fact, later on this evening. So we'll see you again then.